Well, let me throw the question out that started the study. It was a challenge from a group of theologians. And I have not had this challenge since yesterday thrown at me by somebody. Got it online yesterday. Tim, you look at Arab Islam and the Crusades. Then in 29 and following, you have the Ottoman Islamic Empire, and then the time of the end conflict. For a time, the appointed time, and time of the end. Yeah? Well, in Daniel 11:31, we find the abomination of desolation. That would be 508, Tim. How can Daniel 11:31 right here be 508, which happened way before the Crusades? How can this be in sequential order and that be true? Good question. I didn't have a full answer for it at the time that it was thrown at me. But I asked them some questions. I said, I understand that it's based on what is the appointed time of Daniel 11:29. It's part of the description of that. Can you tell me what the appointed time is? No, they couldn't. But they expected me to have the answers. That was totally not fair, but that's the way it goes. When you present, you get attacked. And so that happened in 2011, right after my book came out. And we had a symposium, and I got attacked right after Thanksgiving. You see, you don't do evangelistic series between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It just doesn't work well. And so I do other things there, and we did this Daniel 11 symposium, the first one that I ever participated in. Probably the first one in recent time. And had a good time, 3 days of it. I had one day, Uriah Smith Viewpoint had another, and Atheism is the King of the South had the third day. And that was what they were pushing on me. I said, okay, when I got home, I said, Lord, I don't care what it takes. You can prove me wrong. You can turn my world upside down. I'll recant the book. I'll do anything, but I want to know the truth about the appointed time and the sequence. I had a hunch it's based on those time prophecies of Daniel 12, the 12:9 and 13:35, but I wasn't sure. I'd gone to several symposiums on the Daniel 12 and the 12:90 and 13:35, and nobody seemed to have a really good answer. And I'd kind of come to the conclusion that it might be a little too hard for me to understand. I will just tell you, as long as you think it's too hard to understand, it will be too hard for you to understand, because you won't work that hard to figure it out. But now that I'm being put under the microscope by these other folks, I have a need to understand. Lord, it's all yours. I sat down at my desk after that symposium, and I said, Lord, help. Here we go. Show me. And within a couple of days, the answers were to come together, the basic answers, and then over the years, God would add deeper and deeper stuff with further understanding. Here's what we found. And I say we, first it was me, then it was some others digging as well. All right? You always in Daniel have a vision followed by additional information and interpretation, and the time element is always in the additional information. It's not in the original vision part. You see, what happens is if you've been immersed in Daniel for 20-some years, you start to kind of get a feel for Daniel and how he does things. And as I was sitting there looking over it, and going over it, it hits me that this pattern applies in all these places, 2, 7, and 8. Now, you get the vision, the what, that's Daniel 11:2 to 12:4. The additional information comes in 12:4 and 5 and following, and sure enough, the time element comes in the additional information, just like all the previous ones. And Daniel 12:6, and one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillments of these wonders be? What's the time element for the Daniel 11 visions that he just had? It's just like in Daniel 8 when it said, how long will the vision be of the evenings and mornings? He asked how long. He's given 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay, so you would expect a time answer. So let's take a look. The first time mentioned in Daniel 11 is that there would be only for a time. You have the rise of the papacy. And after the league is made, like Daniel 2, iron and clay joined together, a league being made. Daniel 11, it's the Holy Roman Empire, or being formed out of the pagan and papal Roman empires, being linked together. He shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people, but only for a time. There is a limited amount of time that he's going to be in power. Now, it didn't say how long here, did it? But if the little horn is the same as the king of the north, how long will it be in power? Time, and half a time. 1,260 years. Okay. I'd assume that from Daniel 7. But we take a look at Daniel 12:7. And what's the first time prophecy that shows up? That it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. So this time period, the first time period mentioned in Daniel 11, goes with the first prophetic time given in 12 in the interpretation. And that is for a time. And so this power comes up, and in 538 to 1798, the papacy holds power, supremacy. That's easy. We've already understood that. The question really is, what about the appointed time of verse 29 and following? At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. What time prophecies do we have to go with that? I didn't know of any. But if the first time mentioned has a time period in Daniel 12, why wouldn't I expect the second one to have a time period mentioned in 12? But I looked at something else. When's the first time Daniel uses the phrase appointed time? Because whenever somebody mentions something the first time, they often explain it a little bit. You do it in conversations. The first time you say who somebody is, and after that you just call him he or she. Happens all the time. So I went to Daniel 8:19, which is the first time he uses the term appointed time. Look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. Now, a couple of things to remember. Number one, the words shall be at the end of that sentence are in italics in King James Version and New King James. That doesn't mean more important. It means they're supplied by the translator and they're less important. Okay? So in the Hebrew it says, for at the appointed time the end. The end of what? It's sure not the end of time. It keeps going a long time after that. At the appointed time the end. Well, 1798 is the appointed time, the end of the 1260. The end of the 2300 days is 1844. An appointed time focuses you on the end. But we got a problem here. It's not only the end, but it's also the latter time of the indignation. It's the latter part of the time of the indignation. Except nobody seemed to know what the indignation was either. So I figured, no wonder this hasn't been figured out. You can look in the Adventist commentary. Yeah, they kind of skip over it. But I didn't have the privilege of skipping over it anymore. I have a group of scholars that are harassing me on this. I looked in Daniel 11, and he uses the word appointed time several times there. But get this one. In Daniel 11:27, the end will still be at the appointed time. So in verse 27, the appointed time is what? Future. In verse 29, the appointed time is? You're at the appointed time. It's present. Verse 35, it is still for the appointed time. The appointed time is now future. If you have a sequential book, how can you go future, present, future? Boy, that had me digging. Actually, it's much easier than it looks. Because that means it has to have two ending points. And if it has two ending points, it has to have how many beginning points? 2. And believe it or not, Daniel's got both the beginnings and the ending points twice. Daniel 12. What is the second time prophecy? And from the time that the daily sacrifices is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Oh, boy. Well, really, it's supposed to bring you to a blessing, and it starts with the abomination of desolation. And how many abominations of desolations are in the Daniel? I mean, all we have to do is find his abomination of desolation, and we can do this, right? Except there are 2 abominations of desolation in the book of Daniel. And they're very different events. The first one is in Daniel 9:27. And it says, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. He's talking about the fall of Jerusalem. How do I know that for sure? Jesus said so. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then that those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. This was literally fulfilled in 70 A.D. So Jesus' understanding of Daniel has the literal fulfillment in 70 A.D., which is after the cross. And if Jesus can say this is the abomination of desolation, then is it? I think so. Jesus is my authority. All right? Now, then there will be great tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. I want you to notice Jesus gives 2 applications. One starting from the fall of Jerusalem, the other one happening during the great tribulation during the Dark Ages. And what the first one is tied to the fall of Jerusalem, the second one is because of the fall of Christianity. There's a parallel. Ellen White, describing Jesus' statement here in Matthew 24, says there is a twofold application. Well, maybe we should take her up on that and take a look. So let's just go from the abomination of desolation, the fall of Jerusalem, 70 A.D. If you come down 1,290 years, it brings you to 1360. And I'm going, whew, that was good, Lord. Thank you. Maybe I won't have to recant this book after all. Because it comes just after the Crusades and before the Ottomans. That's it, right in that narrow window of time that it would have to be for me to be right. But what in the world happened in 1360? Well, I got online, and within a few minutes, I was really pretty excited. Because in 1360, a guy by the name of John Wycliffe was just beginning his ministry. He's known as the theoretician of the Reformation. Now, here's the interesting thing. Verses 29 to 39 talk about both the Ottoman Empire and the Reformation, but they actually speak more about the Reformation than they speak about the Ottomans. It's both of them. Would Wycliffe have anything to do with the beginning of the Reformation? Obviously, if he's a theoretician of the Reformation. Then I want to know what 1335 might do. That brings me to 1405. In June of 1405, the Bishop of Rome sends a message to the Bishop of Prague saying to silence John Huss, who is known by historians as the first practicing reformer. Well, would the theoretician of the Reformation and the first practicing reformer have anything to do with the beginning of the Reformation? Yes. By 1415, John Huss was dead, burned at the stake. And by 1453, the Ottoman Empire had taken Constantinople. Whoa! The rise of the Reformation and the rise of the Ottoman Empire were happening simultaneously. Just like described in the text. Oh. Now, I thought I was the only one to ever see this stuff before. I had never read it anywhere. And then one day, on a snowy Sabbath afternoon, I curled up by my wood stove, deciding to read. I'd walked over to my bookcase, and I had the Prophetic Faith of Our Father set that somebody had given away and just had in a stack of used books for free, and I took them. It's about prophecy and history. Now, why wouldn't I like that? And I now have an opportunity, and I just pull off that one of the volumes, and I just start leafing through it just for the fun of it, just to see what I'm going to find. I'm browsing. Guy by the name of William Hale in the 1830s is teaching from 70 AD, 1290, and 1335 with Wycliffe and Huss. He's a Millerite preacher. He's not a nobody. He's the one that sorts out the dates for the 70th year, 27, 31, 34 AD. He also had this. And he has two applications from the two different starting points of Daniel. Solomon's right. There's nothing new under the sun. But it was kind of fun to find somebody long ago. Now, the Millerites didn't really care about this first one because that didn't have anything to do with 1843 and 44. His second application did, so that's what they ran with. And that's why Adventists only know about one of his applications and not the other. Because the Millerites only broadcast the second one, not the first one. Look what Great Controversy says. Now remember, Ellen White would have known Hale and the Millerite movement. In a chapter on John Wycliffe, she says, except among the Waldenses, the Word of God had for ages been locked up in languages known only to the learned. But the what? Time had come. When Wycliffe begins his ministry, there is a important time that has come. That would be fulfillment of Daniel's appointed time. For the scriptures to be translated and given to the people of different lands in their native tongue. The world had passed its midnight, the hours of darkness were wearing away, and in many lands appeared tokens of the coming dawn. Had the sun actually risen yet? You're just at the beginning of the break of day, right? It's just starting to lighten. So Ellen White very carefully pinpoints that Wycliffe is not the actual break of day, it is the time just before the break of day. Where would she say you have the break of day, I wonder? John Huss. Look at this. So perish God's faithful light bearers, Huss and Jerome. But the light of the truths which they proclaim could not be extinguished. As well might men attempt to turn back the sun in its course as to prevent the dawning of that day which was even then breaking upon the world. Wow. It's as if she was very aware of what William Hale was presenting. You have a time fulfilled with Wycliffe, and then it breaks out in the open with Huss. What you have is the introduction to the Reformation during this time. It was pointed out in prophecy. But get this, not only was the Reformation coming into play during this time, but between 1360 and 1405, the Ottoman Empire was rising. And then from this time following, the Ottoman Empire and the Reformation were strong. And the amazing thing is, we're going to see in a little bit, they're going to go down together as well. It's the appointed time. Now, what's the second abomination of desolation? That one's Daniel 11:31. And brother, you said I've thrown a lot of information at you. Now I'm really doing it, right? My wife says this is the graduate level course. But we have discs that go and just give this whole presentation if you want to play it over and over again. What's the second abomination of desolation? It's Daniel 11:31. And it says, "Forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation until the time of the end." So, the second one is going to take us to the time of the end. But the abomination of desolation is when they get the force of arms. When does the papacy get military support? Well, that's in 508. But how can we have us going back to 508 after we've already been up to the beginning of the Reformation and the Ottoman Empire? We're in the 1400s and then we go back to 508? That's jumping back 900 years. How would that happen? Something very interesting is going on here. Daniel 11:31, right here, begins in the Hebrew with something that is called a vav disjunctive phrase. I don't even like English grammar, let alone Hebrew grammar. But I've learned a few things. A vav disjunctive means there is a break in the story. You know, when you're watching a film, you get a camera change. You move from one scene to another scene. You know, there's a break. That's what a vav disjunctive does. It's like a change of camera scene. And what has happened is they've gone through the papacy and its interaction with the Roman Empire during the Crusades and the Ottoman time period. And now it takes a step back and looks at the papacy alone as a global spiritual power that causes trouble. In the first two, it says he returns home and attacks God's people. In the third one, it's now globalized. He doesn't return home for the attack. And so we're now setting up this power that is going to go and attack in the third round globally. And he does it with a disjunctive phrase. So when the Pope gets the force of arms, 508, it comes down to 1798 when the Pope loses the force of arms. The French King Clovis gives him the force of arms, and Napoleon, with the force of arms, takes him down. Napoleon, France. It's France on both ends of that one. 1335 brings you down to 1843-44. Okay, remember it's supposed to bring you the good news. Hey, is it good news to have the Bible translated and given to people in their native tongues and righteousness by faith being taught again? Yeah. What's the good news here? Well, the papacy stops persecuting people. Is that good news? Especially if they were going to kill you, it's good news. And this brings you to the judgment, the proclamation of the judgment. Is it good news when you're found innocent in God's court because of the righteousness of Jesus Christ? Yeah, that's all good news. All of you take them to the end of those at the appointed time, the end, it's always good stuff that comes out of it. So, What you have is between 1360 and 1843-44, you have the appointed time. You have the rise of the Ottoman Empire and the Reformation. They're strong. And then from 1798 to the 1840s, they collapse. And the Protestant Reformation takes on Counter-Reformation prophecy teachings. And you get futurism and preterism out of the deal. And it throws out the papacy as the little horn problem, king of the north. And the Reformation is over because what are you protesting about if there's no one to protest? In effect, the Reformation was over when they picked up a false prophetic teaching. Now, let's take a look at something. The appointed time was to be the latter part of the indignation. Well, would it make God upset or be an indignation when his sanctuary is being trampled underfoot? And that was going to happen for 2,300 days. I want you to notice something. From the black lines, it's the last part of the 2,300 days. These points in time bring us to the latter part of that. But it also brings us, if you go from the inner points, it brings us to the last part of the 1260 when God's people were being attacked. One is his sanctuary under attack, the other is his people. By the way, we as his people are his temple. You are the temple of God. His heavenly temple and his earthly temple are under attack. He's upset about both of them. The inside is the latter part of the people. The outside is the latter part of the heavenly sanctuary. Isn't that interesting? All of a sudden, I had discovered something that tied all of Daniel's time prophecies together into one unit. A complete connection. Oh, wow. That was interesting. Now, yeah. Is it possible for Daniel to go back in time in Daniel 11? Sequencing. Coming along and then take a step back. Yes, we know of another place he did that. In Daniel 11, 44 and 45, you have the tidings, loud cry. Papacy attacks God's people, but the papacy comes to its end. It doesn't say how the papacy comes to its end. Daniel 12, 1 through 3 does. It comes back, and when God's people are attacked, the judgment ends. Michael stands up to defend God's people. There's a time of trouble like there never was. Oh, how does the papacy end? God is troubling them. And Jesus delivers his people as the papacy comes to its end at the end of the plagues and tribulation time. Wow. So what Daniel does, he comes up, finishes one part, steps back in time, and then explains the next part. That's exactly what we have here. In Daniel 11, from the fall of Jerusalem, it gives you the localized, literal application of what was happening around the Mediterranean in the first two conflicts. In the third one, it goes back and starts it from 508 and moves forward, and it shows you the globalized religious application as it goes on into the end of time. It's amazing the stuff that's in there. Now, that answered the hard one. Now the other easy one. What's the time of the end? I think it's easy, but I have been chewed out for my understanding of this one. My conference president and I once disagreed publicly in camp meeting over what the time of the end is. I didn't know that one was coming. We had agreed to do a Daniel 11 presentation at camp meeting, both of us standing at the podium together, and we're going to do Daniel 11. And my conference president said, we ought to prepare for this together. I said, you're right, we should. And he says, but I'm busy. And every time we had an appointment, it got canceled because he was busy, or I got busy. And finally, I said, Elder McPherson, I put a PowerPoint together to keep us moving. This was during Camp Pitch. I said, we still should get together. And he said, yeah, we should, but we didn't. And so we are talking Daniel 11, which has had its debates in the Adventist Church, and we're going to team present Daniel 11. He'd been listening to my ideas and studying on his own. I hope this ends well. And we're going along, and we're actually matching on Daniel 11. Except at the time of the end, I said one thing, and he said another. We looked at each other, and I said, guess we don't agree on that one. I said, well, let's keep going. And we just let it go and kept going. A couple of years later, I heard him making a presentation, and he talked about the time of the end, and he gave the same date that I give. I said, whoa. Did you just say? He said, yeah, there's this goofy pastor that changed my thinking on that. Here's where I find the time of the end is. Daniel 8:13 through 14. How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be... Let's see, my battery pack just came loose because my wire's pulling on it, which was pulling on my ear, which was not fun. We'll see if that fixed anything. And the desolation, giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. The first section deals with the fall of the temple, and the other one with the fall of his people. It's everywhere once you see it. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. But if you keep reading, you find this. Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. What vision takes you to the time of the end? The 2,300 days does, not the 1260. According to Daniel. Okay, that would mean you got 1844. Remember, this second set was to bring you to the time of the end, and it brings you down to the year 1843-44. Now, interesting, 43-44, their years are not, their year of 1843, the biblical year, would extend into what we call 1844. So it's interesting how that plays out. It's kind of like school years. They're not a January to January. The biblical year is from spring to spring. So that actually carried it in 1844. Now, so that matches everything I'd found. And you have, if this is the introduction to the Reformation, if 1844 is the time of the end, from 1798 to 1844 would be the introduction to the time of the end. Tote is time of the end, by the way. So, again, notice how symmetrical this is. While the Reformation, the Ottomans are going up in this introduction, they're going down in this one, while the players are coming up. I want you to notice, from 1798 to 1844, you have the collapse of the King of the North and the King of the South, and they're beginning to rebound. You have the United States, the ally of the papacy, coming into play. You have the French Revolution and the rise of today's radical left and Marxist socialism. All of these are happening in this introduction. And once you hit 1844, Ellen White says, Christ could have come. She starts making her this comments. Jesus could have come shortly after 1844, which means every prophetic player had to be in place by 1844. Was the United States there? Yes. Was the French Revolution there and its aftermath still following? Yes. Was Islam there? Yes. Was the papacy there? Yes. This introduction is serious business. And so in 1798, you are not in the time of the end, you are in the introduction to the time of the end. and all the players are being put in order, and by 1844, everything is there. When is the first time the United States attacks Muslim terrorist activity? Thomas Jefferson sends a U.S. Navy vessel into North Africa to stop the Barbary pirates who were trying to establish a caliphate. And the Pope said that tiny nation of the United States has done more to fight against radical Islam than all the European nations put together. Whoa! From way back, the papacy saw the United States as its ally against Islam. The players were in place. There was even a radical Muslim group the U.S. was fighting during that time. So all of this happens from 1798 to 1844. Now, so what are my reasons that 1844 is the time of the end and following? Number one, Daniel said so in Daniel 8:13-17. Number two, it is sealed until the time of the end. 826, the 2300 days were sealed till the end of that vision. Did they understand the 2300 days before 1844 or at 1844? They understood it in 1844, in the fall of 1844, after they were disappointed. So, I want you to notice, if Daniel 11 is not going to be unsealed until the time of the end, it's after 1844, not in 1798. So that fits everything. There's a link between Daniel 11:35 and 12:9 and 10 with that third conflict when God's people are made white. When is your record cleansed in heaven? Before 1844 or after? After. So once you hit the time of the end, there is a cleansing of God's people going on in heaven. Now that fits. The seventh trumpet, third woe of Revelation 11 is while the dead are being judged. That doesn't happen until 1844 and following. The cleansing of the sanctuary. Number 5, after 1844, Jesus can now come at any time. So we are now in the time of the end. Could Jesus come in 1840 and Daniel 8 still be accurate? No. The heavenly judgment had to begin in 1844 as predicted. Then Jesus can now come at any time. How long should it take Jesus to complete the judgment if he wanted to hurry? Seconds? I mean, he can speak a world into existence. He can judge it too, right? I have no problem with God doing it really fast. But it's interesting. He can come at any time. If he can now come at any time, once you hit 1844, you're living in the time of the end can now happen at any time. And Revelation 10:6 says, and there's time no longer or no more delay. So, you have the appointed time, followed by the time of the end. Before the appointed time, you have the former conflict, the Crusades. After the appointed time, you have the time of the end. And by putting up these bookends, showing both the beginning and end of the appointed time, he put into a time frame all the other parts of the Daniel 11 prophecy. Okay, I'm going to close with this part. What about 1290 and 1335 as future applications? Boy, do I hear that, both in and out of the Adventist church. And they often want to use the 1290 and the 1335 to do it. Seventh-day Adventists tend to want to do it with the Sunday law being the abomination. And they want to do it as saying, It's 1290 and 1335 literal days from the Sunday law to the close of probation or something like that, and then to the coming or voice of God when he says when it's going to happen. I'm going to explain to you why I cannot agree with that. Number one, there are only 2 abominations of desolation in the book of Daniel. They're both past. And if you're going to decide that there's a third one, it's no longer Daniel's prophecy, it's now yours. Whoops. But Ellen White says that's an abomination. So? You look through the Bible, there's all kinds of abominations. You read through Ellen White's writings, there's all kinds of abominations. But for Daniel's prophecy, it needs to be Daniel's abomination of desolation. Just like Jesus said it in Matthew 24. And Jesus referenced 2, Daniel references 2, there are 2, not 3. Be careful. Now, if you're really sure that you're right, just realize it's not on Daniel, it's on you. Whatever good or bad that it does, it's all yours. It's not Daniel's prophecy. Because you're taking a Daniel time period and placing it on your abomination of desolation, not on his. I can't do that. Number 2, we don't know the time of Christ's coming. Jesus said, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." And I don't even know how many times I've heard this. Well, Jesus said we can't know the day or the hour, but he didn't say we couldn't know the year. I recently had a guy put in writing, sent it to me in a group message that went out to a lot of people, that Jesus just said we couldn't know the day or the hour. He didn't say we couldn't know the season or the year. I sent him an email back and said, you appear to be mistaken. You only did your search in the Gospels. But Jesus, it's in red letters, in Acts, says something else. Acts 1 verse 7, Jesus says, "It is not for you to know the times," which is years or seasons, "for which the Father has put in his own authority." There it is. He also said times and seasons. I said, you really ought to send out an email and correct this. Because the guy is determined to set dates for the coming of Jesus, he did not send out the email to correct his statement. By the way, if you have to be slippery around different texts to get your point across, you've probably got a problem. You got to be really honest with the text and don't fudge what the Bible says. I thought I had something here. Yeah, I want to go to that. Some Ellen White statements on setting times. Ellen White went through the Millerite movement when they set a time for Jesus coming at least twice and were disappointed. She knows what it was like. And her statements are really, really pretty solid. You will not be able to say that he will come in 1, 2, or 5 years. Neither are you to put off his coming by stating that it may not be for 10 or 20 years. Okay, whoa. I can't say he will be here in 1, 2, or 5 years. I also can't say he won't be here in 10 or 20. Now, you think about that. I can't set any time frame hardly without breaking that. Well, it's going to be here in less than 10, and I can't say that he will come in 1, 2, or 5. So I'm going to say 7. He's going to be here in about 7 years. In 2 years, what happens? It's now within 5 years, and I'm crossways to this statement. You can't beat this one. And it's just... The repeated efforts to find new dates for the beginning and close of prophetic periods and the unsound reasoning necessary to sustain these positions not only leads minds away from the present truth, but throw a contempt upon all efforts to explain the prophecies. The more frequently a definite time is set for the second advent, and the more widely it is taught, the better it suits the purposes of who? Satan. Who's behind setting dates for the coming of Christ? Satan. That's not me. That's Ellen. After the time is past, he excites ridicule and contempt of its advocates. Those who persist in this error will at last fix upon a date that is too far in the future for the coming of Christ. Thus they will be led to rest in a false security, and many will not be undeceived until it's too late. Two errors that happen. If the date passes, people throw out Bible and Bible prophecy and Jesus. Boy, have I watched that happen. The other one is they set a date that's too far in the future. And people, being the procrastinators they are, they think I've got 5 years to get ready when they don't. Now, I will tell you there's a movement right now to say Jesus will come in 2027 or earlier in the Adventist Church. I'm here to tell you, I'm hoping and praying it's the one too far in the future. But because of it, some people will be lost. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to say, we're living in the time of the end. Be ready now. How long do we have? Here's what I'm going to tell you. You know, a little bit ago I looked at my phone and read the army of God is marching to Texas. I wasn't kidding. That's the Drudge Report right now. I'm telling you, I've been saying this for several years. You need to be ready for Jesus, everything to be completed in Bible prophecy, and we're out of here in a year or less. You need to be living your life ready to leave here in a year or less. On the flip side, you need to be ready to die of old age first. Because I don't know how many more, if any more, timeouts are coming. Because God's people are too lazy to share the gospel. Which is pathetic. But there could be timeouts. But there may not be. God may have said, no more timeouts. I'm done. I'm going to cut it short now. I don't know. I'm hoping we're out of here really soon. So when I see God's army is marching to Texas, okay. Maybe we're going to be out of here. The right is pushing back globally. It's not just in the U.S. It's in one nation after another right now. I was down in Australia, and I got the idea that I got somebody pretty mad. There were about 200 people in this presentation, and this guy stands up in this right up front, and I just shared this text from Great Controversy. What gives me the idea that he's angry is he's yelling at me. The veins in his neck are bulging. His face is getting darker. I'm red-green colorblind, but I'm assuming that means his face is turning red. And he is upset. He said, young man, I have read great... He was older than me. This was about 10 years ago. And he said, young man, I've read Great Controversy more times than you have. I've read it 57 times. This guy's setting dates for the coming of Jesus. I guess I missed how to diffuse the situation on this one. I said, sir, I don't care how many times you've read it. It still says what it says. That's doing the work of Satan. He turned around and he looked at the audience. He says, okay, everybody, let's go. Let's destroy this guy's ministry. Let's leave. Follow me. And he marches out the door. By himself. That was interesting. What do you do after that explosion just happens? I'm standing there for a moment saying, Lord, what do I do now? And another man nearby where he was sitting raises his hand. And at the moment, while I'm trying to regain my thoughts, I'm just saying, okay, yes. And he just asked me some simple, non-related question of the explosion that just happened. I'm thinking, thank you, Lord. And we just answered that question and went on. I will tell you, you bring some of these comments up, and some people get really, really mad. Our position has been one of waiting and watching, with no time proclamation to intervene between the close of prophetic periods in 1844 and the time of our Lord's coming. Did you catch that? No time proclamation. Do you know what no time proclamation means? No time proclamation is what it means. If you're setting a time, you are breaking that statement. And the time of our Lord's coming, we do not know the day nor the hour or when the definite time is. And yet the prophetic reckoning shows us that Christ is at the door. You don't need a time prophecy to know it. Daniel, the little book in Revelation 10, is time prophecy, goes bitter, you're going to present it again with no time. Can we not understand that? No time means no time. Again and again, I've been warned in regard to time setting. There will never again be a message for the people of God that will be based on time. Never again is pretty strong words, right? We are not to know the definite time either for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit or for the coming of Christ. At one point she says, or any other item of significance. If it's significant enough to have a time prophecy, it won't have one. Let all our brethren and sisters beware of anyone who would set a time for the Lord to fulfill His word in regard to His coming or in regard to any other promise He has made of special significance. It is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father hath put in His own power. False teachers may appear to be very zealous for the work of God and may expend means to bring their theories before the world and the church. But as they mingle error with truth, their message is one of deception and will lead souls into false paths. They are to be met and opposed, not because they are bad men, but because they are teachers of falsehood and are endeavoring to put upon falsehood the stamp of truth. You do not have to say somebody's on their way to hell because they're setting a date. Not because they're bad people, they're just wrong, so oppose it. All right? You can love them, but they're wrong. I have close friends who are setting dates for the coming of Christ. And they know how I feel about it, and they kind of put up with me about it, but it's kind of a shaky piece that we have on that score. Well, actually, I just ran right off the end of that one. Do you have any other questions? Okay. There are some who say that the Catholic Church started Islam, and there's some who say they did not. I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter which way it goes. It's the same ending point. All right? I actually, in the history that I know, I do not believe Islam was a creation of the papacy. I do believe it was a political creation. I'm not sure how much Muhammad actually did or said. You want to get an idea of how radically off our history could be, watch a guy by the name of Jay Smith online. He's a guy that debates Muslims, and he's a rather interesting guy, has a price on his head. Muslims don't like it if you dig into their history too much, because there's some really nasty stuff in their history. The Quran, Muhammad didn't write anything. Well, our Old Testament wasn't written down till Moses either. But when you find out how the Quran got written down, that gets really interesting. There were a bunch of different fragments of parts and things that supposedly he said that were written down. And so they gathered all the parts, and somebody wrote down the final message of the Quran, and they destroyed all the evidence of anything else. They got rid of all the contradictions, supposedly. And if anybody disagreed, you just killed them. You really don't have anything like that in Bible history. Nothing like that. And we keep finding our old evidence, and it always strengthens our current. If they were to find their old evidence, it would be rather interesting, but they claim that they've destroyed it all. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see what God has in store. But what I think actually happened, based on what I've studied, we have Muhammad. He's interested in spiritual things. He dabbles in Christianity and Judaism. He then makes a hybrid of all these with the Arab moon worship out of Mecca. And there's a reason there's a little moon on their stuff. And so you have this happening, and he starts out quite peaceful, but then he turns more and more violent. Political power corrupts. Always has. It's what corrupted Christianity as well. He starts out relatively good and goes really bad, like Balaam did in the Old Testament. He may have been listening to God at the beginning, but then it goes bad. And he dies, and he begins his process in 612 where he supposedly heard from the angel. By 30 years later, he's dead, and the Muslim armies push up out of the Saudi Arabian peninsula, and they take Israel, take around Syria and all them, and come back and conquer Jerusalem, and then sweep across North Africa. As the Muslim armies were leaving Saudi Arabia, Abu Bakr, the son-in-law of Muhammad, who is now the caliph, shouts out to his army to spare the true people of the book. But when you find the guys with the coffered hair or whatever, the monks, split their skulls. From the very beginning, the Muslims treated true Christians different than Catholics and killed the Catholics. To this day, you do not want to be considered a Christian in the Middle East. When I walk into a mosque, I do not introduce myself as a Christian. If you're in the southern Philippines, you better know how to answer when they pull out machine guns and say, everybody off the bus, Muslims over here, Christians over there. You do not go with the Christians. You make a statement, but I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm a follower of Jesus and the Bible. That could save your life at that moment. In many places in the Muslim world. You see, a Christian in the Muslim world is a crusader. Who sends out crusaders? The Pope does, their enemy. Do you really want to be considered a follower of the Pope? So when I walk into a mosque, I am a follower of Jesus and the book. I say, I don't eat pork, I don't drink alcohol, I believe the whole book, not half of it, and I don't worship on the Crusader day of worship. I follow the book. I want them to know who I am, and if I say a Christian, they're confused. So I don't want to use that term around them because it's crucial for them to understand it. Now, I'm going to do something, and I hope it's not too offensive to you. But I just want you to think in history to where you've seen this symbol before. There you go. That's the Crusades. That's a Crusader flag. That one's the American flag, right? In Revelation 13, it's going to start out good and end up going what? Really bad. So here's I'm walking on ice at the moment. Thin ice. Do you know most of our churches are flying the 2 flags of Revelation 13? Think about that. Now, I am very glad to be an American citizen so far. That passport means a lot to me. Believe me, when I get in trouble outside the United States, it's nice to have a U.S. passport. I have used it. And it's nice to know that I can get on a plane and come back to this country. But I know that it's changing. And the Bible says it's changing. So be careful the words you use, maybe even the symbols that you use, because you don't want to be misunderstood. And it's interesting. I'm accused by Adventists of being hard on Muslims. But then I asked the Adventist, have you ever been in a mosque? No, except in a tour. That didn't count. So you want to go into a mosque with me? I go into several of them a year. I walk in with a brochure that looks like this and say, hey, I'm the guy presenting down the street. I want to invite you to come. I'm a true person of the book. I believe in Jesus and I follow the Bible. And it's not an attack against Islam. I'll talk about the good and bad of both Islam and Christianity. You want to come? I tell them I don't eat pork, don't drink alcohol, all that stuff. They look at me and say, who are you? I told you I'm a true person of the book. In the Quran it says you're supposed to respect true people of the book. That's me. It's kind of fun, unless I hit a radical mosque. And there are a few of them. Most of them are not radical in the United States. But there are some, and I've hit 2 of them so far. That's not fun. I will tell you, the worst one I was in, I was just thanking God the pastor and I got out of there walking on our own power. We did not get beat up, but it came really close. Within 2 months, 17 people were killed by one of the people at that mosque in Southern California. Have you ever been to an Adventist church where it was really friendly and warm and welcoming? That's what most mosques are like. You ever been to an Adventist church that was really miserable to be around? That's what a few radical mosques are like. Anyway, so my point here is, I know Veith and others say Islam is a product of the Catholic Church. I don't see the Catholic Church as the puppeteer. I see it as a puppet. And Islam as a puppet. I see Satan as the puppeteer. I'm not going to give the papacy that much credit. Satan is the one working all this dialectic stuff out, the chaos and all this. Are there bad players in all of them? Yeah. Are there conspiracies? Probably. But you may have noticed I didn't deal in conspiracies. I don't need to. Daniel 11 is so clearly being fulfilled, you don't need any of that stuff. And you see, the problem with conspiracy theories is this. Some of them are true, some of them are false, and it's really hard to figure out which are which. And I don't have enough time to go into that black hole to sort it out. So I deal with those things that I can obviously prove are happening. And that's what I do. And it works really well. Hope that helped. That's my take on it. And again, it doesn't matter if the papacy started it or it started on its own under the auspices of Satan. We're still in the same spot. Doesn't matter. If the papacy started it, it got away from him, and it's kind of nasty. I want you to notice the French Revolution, the first woes, Islam and the woes, and the beast all come from the bottomless pit. They're all of Satan. They're all from Satan. So just know he's really the puppeteer.